We are going to resume our study of Joshua, the book of Joshua, and turn to chapter 10. Just do the first 14 verses today. There's a lot to cover here. So if you've ever done Vacation Bible School, if you've ever heard a children's song, these words will make sense to you. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. You've got to include the finger wag. There's nothing my God cannot do. I appreciate y'all singing along with me. That was great. But my God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. It's not really lyrical as much for me, but that's the words of a children's song. And that's what we're going to look at. How big is your God? How big is God? How big is your God? I did just a quick little research this morning, and the observable universe from, of course, Earth is the center of that. It's kind of a joke. As far as we can see, from one edge to the edge of the universe is 46 billion light years. Now, of course, that's a lot. So you double that. If we're in the middle, then the width of the universe is in both directions. The diameter, that would be the radius. The diameter would be 92 light years. 1 light year equals 5.879 times 10 to the 12th. It's just a big number. Let's forget about trying to understand. It's a lot. It's a big place. And that's just what? The observable universe. I mean, that doesn't mean that's all that there is. The universe is huge. We talk about this, and even in my prayers sometimes I'll say that the God who created the whole universe, everything that we know is everything, He has a personal relationship with you and I. He wants that. That's what we hope He has. A personal relationship with you. Not just with the church, but with us as individuals. And that's a powerful thing to think about even of itself. But today we're going to look at how big is the God that we serve. How big is God? And really the question is, how big is your concept of God? Because God is big regardless of what you think about it. He is God. Your opinion on the matter is not necessary for Him to be God. He is God, and He is big. He's a big God. Is the God you serve, though, big enough to perform miracles on your behalf? Is He big enough to intervene in your life? And that's really based on our understanding and how we utilize the relationship with God. Or does our faith limit what God can do in our lives? That's really the crux of the matter for us today. What is our understanding of God, and what role does He play in our lives? Hopefully He's one that is, like I said, God is big enough to handle anything that we throw at Him and so much more. The first thing that we see, now we're going to look at Israel, because Israel interacting with the rest of the world is always interesting. It's always something that can teach us, whether it's how to do things or what? How not to do things. Because Israel doesn't always do it the right way. Just like you and I don't always do it the right way. The first thing we're going to see in verses 1 through 5, and y'all have to bear with me, there's a lot of names of kings in this passage, okay? So you just go right over that, and I will too. But verses 1 through 5, they remind us of this. The first point is, we need to be reminded that we will face opposition. Things in this life are not always going to go right. This is not a perfect world. I say that all the time. It's a flawed world. It's an imperfect world. Where we are now. But we need to be reminded we will face opposition. Verses 1 through 5 of chapter 10 of Joshua. Now Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its kings as he had done to Jericho and its king. And that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and had become their allies. He and his people were very much alarmed at this, because Gibeon was an important city, it's one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. So Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Homan, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhiah, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. No applause, please. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, he said, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. So these kings were ticked. Gibeon had betrayed their pact to be together and go against Israel. So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. Okay, so Gibeon is being attacked. Remember, Gibeon had deceived Israel. They had deceived Joshua. They had made it look like they were from a faraway place and they just wanted to be allies, when in reality, they were right there in Canaan where Israel was invading. They were taking over the promised land. And Gibeon had tricked Israel, just to make it simple. They had tricked them and deceived them into a treaty. It saved the lives of Gibeon because anyone that's facing Israel is going to be demolished. It's going to be destroyed. So Gibeon was smart in this. But the other tribes of Canaan, the other kingdoms of Canaan, looked at the Gibeonites as traitors, and rightfully so. They had betrayed the other people of Canaan. And they were upset, and they decided, hey, we're going to move against them. Let's attack them and take them out because they're good warriors, and we need them out as quickly as possible. Now, here's the point for us today. By the same token, when we align ourselves with Christ, it's in the world. It's interesting. The concept of God is kind of big, and we know that I've just said that God is a big God. But God's plan for salvation is through Jesus Christ. Period. There's no other way. And Jesus said himself that men can be saved. He made it clear. He didn't make it ambiguous. He didn't make it gray, which is good for us because sometimes we tend to confuse things. We overthink things. It's funny. We had students at Cranberry. We had 3 teams that went into the Envirothon. It's just a competition about environmental concepts. And they did 5 tests. And I was the proctor because the advisor couldn't be in there. It's kind of like the coach. The coach wasn't going to be in there because, you could have the coach say, hey, it's B. They wouldn't do that, but it's just a safety measure. But I was in the same room with them, and some of them were just really overthinking questions. I said, look, I didn't say anything, of course, but they were just overthinking things. And we do that all the time. We have these times that we overthink things. And we go the wrong direction. We make things so complicated. But God wants us to come to him. He's a big enough God to handle all of this. And when we choose to align ourselves with him, we are going to have opposition. Just like Gibeon. Gibeon chose to align themselves with the people of God, Israel. And they had this attack from those that were around them. It's kind of like in a middle school setting, if there's a new kid come in, and someone from a little group goes and befriends the new kid, they can either be the target of some ostracism from those ones that they kind of abandoned. That's the idea here. We're going to be attacked if we identify ourselves and align ourselves with God. When we say we are Christians, that says a lot. That means that we believe that Jesus Christ is the only way. He made it so simple that we don't have to overthink it like kids sometimes do, and adults as well. Israel was the target of much of these attacks because they were aligned with Christ, aligned with God at this moment in time. Wanting to be faithful to God, the world is going to attack that because the world doesn't like that reality, that the world is not enough, that yourself is not enough. And even Satan tries to attack us because he is not enough. We're going to have attacks from all kinds of stuff. We're going to face opposition when we align ourselves with Christ. So the people of Israel, the people of Gibeon, and the people of Aaron Baptist here today need to remember that there will be opposition. Again, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Just be mindful of that. The second thing that we see in verses 6 and 7 is that we need to be reminded that commitments are only good if we back them up. When we give our word, when we say we're committed to something, it only matters if you follow through with that. Now, as a leader in a school setting, I have learned that it's important not to overpromise and underdeliver. You don't want to say, well, you're going to do this. you don't tell the teachers, well, you're going to have, three computers in your room to be able to do all this and not be able to deliver that. I mean, that's a bad example because we've got computers everywhere. But I don't want to say, you're going to have $1,000 to spend on supplies and only give them 100. That's bad. They don't like that when you don't follow through. And rightfully so. You don't want to overpromise and under-deliver. You need to be a person of your word, is what it's saying. Our commitments need to be backed up and followed through. In verse 6, we see, the Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, do not abandon your servants. They're like, help. They're attacking us. We need some help. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us. Because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. The Gibeonites quickly sent word to Joshua, do not abandon us, but come to our rescue. Now, what would you have done if you were Joshua? Think about this for a moment. If you remember the background, remember the Gibeonites tricked him. They appeared to be one thing, and they were another. But he gave his word in a treaty before God and man. Had Joshua not been a man of principle, he could have used this to say, hey, we're not ready to march. Y'all are on your own. Y'all tricked us anyway. We're not going to hold to that treaty. Now, that would have been, but he could have done that. Now, how would that have appeared to other people around, just saying Canaan? That Joshua makes promises that he does not keep. He must not have a God of integrity. He must not be a man of his word, and therefore the God that he worships is not a God of his word. Now, remember, the way that we respond when these situations arise reflect on who we are and who we worship. So when we make a commitment, we need to stick to it. Even if it's not comfortable for us, even if it's not in our best interest sometimes. Now, Joshua didn't think, hey, this is an opportunity to get out. He made a commitment in God's name, and he stuck to it. And he intended to honor it. And that's a powerful thing. It's not just a matter of words, but it's a matter of action. And that's what people are looking for. It seems so much that the world right now wants to see authenticity, wants to see someone be real, not just in word, but in deed. You can talk about a lot of stuff, but our response to things, the actions that we take, need to match the words that we speak. And Joshua does that. He says in verse 7, we see, so Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army. He didn't just dispatch some, his entire army, including all the best fighting men. Now, his response was not minimum. He didn't just send the minimum. He didn't just do what he had to do. He responded powerfully with a statement, a big statement, that he was intending to be a man of his word. What we need to do today, if we have opportunity, is to be people, men and women of our word, to demonstrate that we believe in commitments that we make, that we're going to follow through on them, and say what we mean. I say this is like, I say you need to say what you mean and mean what you say, but you don't have to say it mean. You need to be a person of truth. Say what you mean. Don't beat around the bush, but don't say it in a mean, harsh way. We can do that and say what's wrong is wrong, even when everyone else is doing it, and what's right is right, even if no one else is doing it. That's a great way to demonstrate where our faith truly is. To be people of integrity and let our actions match what we say and believe. Sometimes we make rash decisions. Joshua made a rash decision in agreeing to this pact with the Gibeonites. If he'd have checked it out a little bit more, he'd have found out that these Gibeonites are lying. And they're really people of Canaan. They're right next door. And it's not in our best interest to make this treaty. But he could have found a way to sneak out of it, but he didn't. He was a man of his word. And the reason, it's not so important that we are to elevate us, but when we are people of our word, when we match our actions to our words and what we believe, then we don't glorify ourselves, but we glorify God. Because Joshua, if I'm in Joshua's spot, it would be hard for me to honor this treaty because it was made under false pretenses. I could find a way. I know an attorney or two that could maybe help me find a way out of a contract like this because it was not based in truth. But he held to it. He followed through with it. And it turned out to be a very rewarding thing for Israel. So we need to be reminded that we're going to face opposition, and we need to be people of our word. Be people, when we make a commitment, to honor it. The third thing we see is we need to be reminded that God is with us. We're going to get into really the meat of the lesson here with these next couple of points. We need to be reminded that God is with us. Verse 8, the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." Now this is before the battle. He says this to him. Now, this part in your Bibles, if you want to flip back and look at chapter 1 of Joshua, in verse 5, before the invasion of Canaan at all, God says this to Joshua. This is just a reminder to Joshua of what he said in verse 5. Should have brought my reading glasses. He says, no one, in verse 5 of chapter 1, this is before they enter Canaan, no one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So, a lot of times in our lives, God is going to do things this way. Just like he's doing with Joshua here. He doesn't unveil some new truth. I mean, because God has spoken in his word, especially for us. There's not new truth. If someone says, I have a new truth from God, run in the opposite direction. Because there's not new truth. There is God. And he is the way that Jesus, we know. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's the truth. Now, God works this way in the Old Testament a lot when he's speaking to people, and throughout our lives as well. He doesn't unveil something that you didn't know before. He reminds you of something he's already said. As a parent, sometimes you may have to repeat a direction once or twice, or 200 or 300 times. Now, as a teacher, as an educator, Levin, have you ever had to repeat directions to your students? Couple times. Couple times every minute is what he means. Yeah. Brianna always listens to all the directions the first time, right? Sure. Okay. Be honest. No. Look, God repeats his truth. He repeats his promises that he's already given. And sometimes, have you ever had a promise, like you've read a scripture, you know a passage, and you read it, you read it 5 years ago. Okay, I got it, I understand. You read it today, and it has this special significance for what you're going through right then. That's the Holy Spirit speaking to you through God's word in that circumstance that you find yourself in right then. God can do that. He's a big God. He can take the situation you're in and speak to you through something he's already told you. He knew, well, much more than 5 years ago, that you would need that word right then. He knew that you would need that. So he put that in your mind and he brought it to the surface for this very occasion. He's big enough to do that. He can do that. He's powerful enough to do that. Okay, so armed with this command and the promise of God, Joshua leads his men into battle. They had marched, just so you know, 25 miles from Gilgal to Gibeon under the cover of darkness overnight. They did this overnight. They covered the same distance in about 8 to 10 hours that had previously taken about 3 days. Now they weren't. I don't think that was necessarily supernatural. I think they were just other times they were going at a more leisurely pace. This time they were really moving. They were getting there because they had to go into battle. But they went overnight this distance. This long night march took the enemy completely by surprise. We see in verses 9 through 11. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, so Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them. Wow. That's kind of, think of that in a movie scene. You know, special effects and everything like we got today. That's wild, isn't it? There's this battle, and it's a short-lived battle because all those kingdoms of Canaan, they turn and retreat almost immediately. the Lord throws them into confusion. Now, if you have a different version than NIV, the KJV, a lot of other versions say the Lord is doing these things. The Lord is throwing them into confusion. The Lord is defeating. So here's what I would say to that. Because the NIV says the Israelites were doing some of this. I think that the Israelites were only doing this through the Lord's power. So either way, God is doing it. And we know that. You know, he may use the Israelites to do this, but it's glory to God in every turn, in every situation. So whether the KJV may say that the Lord threw them into confusion and the Lord defeated them completely, and then the Lord hurled down large hailstones, it is the work of God. No question. Every time. But he's using the Israelites in some of this. Some of it he's throwing them into confusion himself, and the Israelites surely aren't throwing down hailstones. That's God, for sure. But he is also leading them into battle and giving them the victory. So don't be confused if it says a little something different there. It is God doing all of this. Now, he routs them in verse 10, or he defeats them. He throws them into confusion. He chased them. He struck them down. That's all God. Now, here's the point. Shouldn't we have this excitement knowing that God is fighting for you on your side? He's on your side. Can you imagine being a soldier for Israel, as you approach this battle, and you're anxious. I mean, you're going into a battle. It's hand-to-hand combat. It's not just sunshine and daisies and everything. It's rough. And they come to it, and you see your enemy retreating. Man, that gets adrenaline going. And then what do they start doing? Pursuing them. And then you see they're all confused. Everything's going crazy. And then as you go down this hill, you see there's these clouds gathering over the enemy. Then all of a sudden, hail starts coming out of those clouds and striking down your enemy. I mean, that's got to be encouraging. You're like, hey, God is fighting on our side. And here's the point for us. We have been, you and I mean, we've encountered enemies that have flattened us, has just decimated you in your life from time to time. We have lost some battles. We have been beat up by circumstances that have not been pleasant. There's been times of weariness with our obligations that we find ourselves under. This past year has been hard, right? I mean, we've lost a lot. We've had circumstances that we would never, 2 years ago, you would have never thought that we would be where we are. But the excitement that we can have is that God is on our side. And really, we're on God's side is really the way it should be in our minds, that we want to be on God's side. But God is fighting for us. He is defeating our enemies. Now, sometimes it may not seem that way, but God is working in the background all the time. He always has a plan. God is fighting for us. Think about this. If he weren't fighting for us, I'll just speak for it. We would already be overwhelmed. Think about your life to this point. We would be overwhelmed by sin, the temptation of sin. We would be overwhelmed by that already if God was not with us. Sin would have defeated us and destroyed our character and our testimony, our witness to others. We would be overwhelmed by the enemy already. But God still fights for you and I. He fights for us. He goes before us. There's some things that he has kept us from that we don't even know about. We're not even aware, but we glorify him because his perfect plan is perfect and the timing is perfect. And he is perfect in that. These soldiers from Canaan, they were running away. They already heard about God's involvement with Israel. God's support of Israel, God's work through Israel, what had happened when Israel faced enemy forces. So they take off running. And there's about a 700-foot drop in elevation over 2 miles from where they were to where they were trying to run to. So that's kind of hard for the Israel army to pursue effectively. But God says, hey, I got this. Hailstorm. I mean, he takes out more than were taken out by the soldiers. In verse 11, it says, more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. So God intervenes in a special supernatural way in this circumstance. Now, this is the first of two miracles that we see in this passage. The second is coming in just a second. But what I want to say is this. Nothing is really dependent upon us in our efforts. It's not about our efforts. That is not the most important thing. The most important thing is our obedience. Our obedience. Joshua was told by God to go do this, and he did. Now, when they went, more of the victory, just if you look at it objectively, was because of God's work. Because he threw them into confusion. He threw down this hailstorm on them. And it said in verse 11 that more of the soldiers, the enemy soldiers, died from the hailstorm than they did by the sword. It's not about our actions so much as our obedience. And God takes care of the rest. It's that first step of obedience that we have to make sure that we understand is important and key and critical in our lives as we walk with God. In verse 12 and 14, we see this one, well, not the last one, we got one more. Need to be reminded that nothing is too great for God. This is really the highlight of the message. Nothing is too great for God. Now, we've seen these posts. If you look at social media a lot, you'll say, don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems what? How big your God is. That's a great thought. It's a great thing to keep in mind. But just picture the sight that must have been awaiting Joshua as if they're going down this hill. If you think about the setting, there was the battlefield, and then the enemies ran. They retreated. They're going down this hill. So as Joshua is walking up, and he's kind of looking over the crest of the hill, and he sees this sight of the hailstorm and his army being completely victorious over these enemy forces. I mean, think about all of that sight. Just think about it, and as I said, that'd be quite the scene from a movie. As far as the eye could see is victory. His forces, being successful, and the enemy panicked and running and being defeated. So the clouds are raining down hail. Joshua's forces are being successful, and he must have realized two things. First, that this was an opportunity to take out all of these armies from all these different kingdoms. This is a great opportunity. And then, as he looked up into the sky, he realized, I don't have enough daylight. It's going to turn dark soon. And I'm just not going to be able to capitalize on this opportunity to defeat all of these enemies. So here's what he does. He prays a kind of a unique prayer, as we see in verse 12. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, Sun, S-U-N, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as is written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There's never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to human beings. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. How about that? So, in verse 12, it says Joshua commanded the sun and moon to stand still. Now, there's a lot of discussion about this, as you can imagine. This second miracle. The first was the hailstorm. This is the second one. The day the sun stood still. Now, what does that mean? There's a lot of different, if you look in commentaries, and you can search on the internet, how did the sun stand still in Joshua and all? There's a lot of different opinions, of course. You can read about all that. Some would say it's just poetic language, and it just seemed like the day was longer. I don't think that this is poetic imagery at all. I think I don't. Here's what I do know and what I don't know. I don't know how God did it. I'm not going to say I know how it happened, because I don't know. I don't think that if the earth stops spinning, there's some gravity there that's going to be concerning to me. We're going to spin all over the world. But I think, but then again, what? God's big enough, right? God can do whatever he needs to do. He transcends our existence. I don't know how God did it. All I know is that he did. It happened. And Joshua and God's people, the people of Israel, were successful over the enemies of the world. Of these enemies that were in the world, I guess. I don't know how it happened, but you know what? Maybe The best answer to this is this answer of faith. And I know that that doesn't like answer it. That doesn't say, yes, this is how it happened. But in Jeremiah, I included this in the bulletin if you look under where there's typically a quote. But Jeremiah 32:27 says this, I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is anything too hard for me? No. Nothing is too hard for God. And if we believe that, if we understand that to be true, doesn't matter if we say, yeah, that's right, because it's right, regardless of if we say it or not. But he is God of all creation. There's nothing too hard for him. That's an amazing statement. And if we have placed our faith in this God, who is God of all mankind, and there's nothing too hard for him, there's nothing too hard for you and I. Now, we're human, and we have these times when things are hard. They're difficult times. But if we trust in this God that is the God of all mankind, there's nothing too hard for him. And he's going to take up for us. He's going to take our part. You know, sometimes if you have a sibling or a cousin or something, they were in a fight and you kind of joined in. He said, I may be able to do that to him, but you can't. God takes up for us. And he wants to always be the first thing we do. We'll see that in just a second. In Lamentations 3, I'll just read this for you. And Jeremiah says this about the destruction of Israel. Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem. He is destroying all of Jerusalem. King Nebuchadnezzar, a wicked king. Here's what Jeremiah wrote in Lamentations. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. For his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. That sound familiar? Maybe a hymn that we sing sometimes. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. That's where we get that hymn from Lamentations. Not from some spectacular, fun, great day. Lamentations. To lament something is sad, usually. But in that book, in the destruction of Jerusalem, comes the great hymn, Great is thy faithfulness. Because he is faithful. Morning by morning, new mercies we see. Tozer said this, and this is really the title of the message. I am positively sure, Tozer's a great theologian, if you're not familiar, he's awesome to read. I am positively sure, after many years of observation and prayer, that the basis of all of our trouble today in religious circles is that our God is too small. Our God is too small. Do we confine God? Do we say, God, this is your arena? Over here is another arena where I can handle all this. Do we confine God to some place, like a church? What do we say if I ask somebody a question? Don't lie. What? You're in church. Do we just confine, don't lie to church? Do we confine God to some time, like Sunday morning and Wednesday night maybe? We do sometimes. God is not confined to anything. He's not small. He is big. I'll ask you a couple questions and see if our God is too small. If prayer is your last resort and not your first response, maybe your God is too small. Should prayer be our first choice? Should taking a problem to God be the first thing we do? Yes. Why would you delay getting an answer? You know, I mean, some people are like, I didn't see that stimulus check yet. Why would you want it as soon as possible, right? Yeah. Why would you delay getting the right answer, the best answer, the perfect answer? Prayer shouldn't be our last resort. Don't make God too small. If fear and worry paralyze you and rob you of peace, your God may be too small. Now, I want to clarify this. Are we all going to have fear and anxiety at some times? Yes. That doesn't mean that you have a small God. The thing is, do you persist in that? Do you live in that fear? Do you live in that anxiety? Don't do that. God is bigger than your anxiety. Now, that doesn't mean it's not real. I'm saying this for mental health reasons. It is real. Fear is real. Anxiety is real. But don't let that control you. Let God control you because he's big enough to do that. Okay? Don't let anxiety persist in your life. Don't let it paralyze you. Don't let it rob you of peace. You know, that's what Satan wants to do. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. Peace is this great gift we have. Don't let it be taken from you. If you cannot forgive yourself or others, your God may be too small. God is able to forgive you of anything. You can't do anything that he can't forgive you of, except reject him. Now that's a different thing. Don't reject God. If you pursue him, he is going to forgive you. And that allows you to forgive others, because that gives you peace as well. If you need answers right now or yesterday, your God may be too small. You don't have to have answers right now. You know who has the answers? God. Do you trust him? Yes. So trust him that he has the answers, and they're the best answers at the right time. If you've lost your sense of wonder, this is a little different than the others. If you've lost your sense of wonder, your God may be too small. We've been out to an observatory where it's really dark and there's no light pollution, and you can look up. I like to look up at the stars. And you can see everything. You know, you can see all the details. And it's amazing to think. And like I said earlier, how big the universe is. We should have a sense of wonder that God is this great God and that he still loves us so much that he would die for us. Verse 14 says this, and this just reminds us of the power of prayer. Power of prayer is significant in our lives. There's never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Now the wording is tricky there, because I think the description of there's never been a day like it is more so about the day where it was the daylight was extended. Because we know this for sure. We know that God listens to our prayers today. He doesn't just listen to Joshua's prayer and that was it. He listens to our prayers. He hears us. And that's what should strike us as amazing, that God listens to your prayers and to my prayers, and he hears us, and he wants to be part of a relationship with us. God still hears our prayers. He heard Joshua, and he hears us as well. He responds when we cry out in need and cry out in love. A great quote to finish up with is that God hearkens to the voice of a man who himself has hearkened to the voice of God. Joshua was in sync with God when he prayed for this victory. That's why it worked. God will work in our lives, and when our prayers become focused on God and not so much on what we need or want, that's when we see this great power in prayer, that it changes us. And it should thrill us, really. Think about those soldiers. Think about those soldiers again. How thrilled they were to see God is fighting for us. Look, this hailstorm has taken out most of them. They're more than we can. That's exciting. I mean, that's powerful to think that God is fighting for you and I. And they did it because of their choice of obedience. Obedience and confidence in God is what happened. And the choice is ours. We can live by our values and what we think is right, or we can elect to be faithful to him and discover that he is going to be faithful back to us. He will every time, all the time. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for your faithfulness.